Tuesday, August 27. I'm Paul Joseph Watson. This is InfoWars Nightly News.
Tonight, Americans say a war with Syria would be the most unpopular conflict ever. Then, the United States attempts to sabotage the UN chemical weapons investigation. And can weather be controlled using lasers? That's next on the InfoWars Nightly News.
I'm a Marine Corps. You're my enemy. You know what? You guys are a bunch of play soldiers, and I've had it with you.
Top story tonight, as the war drums grow louder, an attack on Syria would be the most unpopular war ever. This is up on Infowars.com. Support for an attack on Syria amongst Americans is more than 3 times lower than support for US involvement in Vietnam at the very lowest ebb of the Vietnam War, illustrating how universally unpopular such a move would be, despite the media claiming Obama would, quote, lose credibility if he does not launch a military assault. So we've got chicken hawks like Lieberman, McCain more recently, and the rest of the corporate press floating this talking point that Obama has to follow through on his red line rhetoric in order to save face, to restore his credibility. The question is, to restore his credibility with whom? Because it's certainly not the American people. A Reuters poll shows a mere 9% of Americans support an attack on Syria. The war in Vietnam was 3 times more popular at its most dire point in history in comparison to this planned assault on Syria. And as the Washington blog highlights in another article that we've got on Infowars.com, other things that Americans find more appealing than attacking Syria include North Korea, cockroaches, lice, root canals, colonoscopies, traffic jams, used car salesmen, Genghis Khan, communism, BP during the Gulf oil spill, Nixon during Watergate, or King George during the American Revolution, all more popular amongst Americans than this planned attack on Syria. So does the Obama administration really care that virtually no one supports their imminent attack on Syria? Well, no, because they're merely doing the bidding of a 12-year-plus military-industrial complex agenda to target Syria. And on that note, listen to what Wesley Clark had to say about what he was told by a Pentagon official in the weeks after 9/11.
And by that time, we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
So this is about taking out each rogue nation, i.e. anyone who doesn't comply with the banker military-industrial complex Monsanto, Goldman Sachs rule, one by one. And Syria is next on the chopping block along the path to Persia and ultimately the attack on Iran. Next up, Syria, another Western war crime in the making. This is by Paul Craig Roberts, who of course is a regular guest, former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury in the Reagan administration. And you've got to read the whole article because in it he completely tears apart the notion that Washington has any credibility whatsoever on the issue of chemical weapons. Recall that it was the United States who helped Saddam Hussein carry out his chemical weapons attack against the Iranians in the 80s. Of course, recently released CIA documents confirmed that. But that hasn't stopped the likes of John Kerry and today Jay Carney lecturing the whole world about the threat posed by chemical weapons. So Roberts basically echoes the warnings of others who have slammed the lunacy of this whole intervention and how it could very easily turn into World War III. Here's a passage from the article. Washington is driving the world closer to nuclear war than it ever has been in the past, in the most dangerous periods of the Cold War. And this is the guy who was around at that very time in the Reagan administration. He goes on to say, when Washington finishes with Syria, the next target is Iran. Russia and China will no longer be able to fool themselves that there is any system of international law or restraint on Western criminality. Basically goes on to say that Russia and China know that America has these fifth columns that provoke these phony revolutions in places like Libya, Syria, and Egypt, and that they're arming themselves with deterrent, with nuclear weapons in order to counter that in the future. Because after Syria, after Iran, eventually you're going to get to Russia, you're going to get to China. So amazing article by Paul Craig Roberts. I would urge you to read it in full on Infowars.com. Next up, military strikes on Syria as early as Thursday, US officials say. This is NBC News. Missile strikes against Syria could be launched as early as Thursday. Senior US officials said today as the White House intensified its push towards an international response to the suspected use of chemical weapons. Before any investigations actually being able to take place, of course, they're talking about 3 days of strikes that would be limited in scope. In my view, that whole limited strike rhetoric is probably a ruse. They're going to attack. They're going to wait until Syria. How dare they? They're going to wait until they defend themselves and then use that defense as another pretext to continue the assault. How dare they fight back? How dare they try and defend their country? But if you don't care about, the lives of Syrian people already decimated by a civil war, if you don't care about the threat of World War III, maybe you'll care about this. Record numbers of Americans, of course, on food stamps, major cities like Detroit going bankrupt. But the first stage, just the first stage of what they're talking about, this Tomahawk cruise missile attack, could cost up to $750 million, just the first stage of it. And that's on you, the taxpayer, of course. $750 million to help al-Qaeda terrorists seize control of a country just like in Libya. Is that really money well spent in these perilous economic times? But they're talking about airstrikes as early as Thursday, pretending that the decision hasn't been made when it obviously has. Next up, US attempts to sabotage UN chemical weapons investigation. Again, this is up on Infowars.com. Desperate to maintain a narrative that will justify a cruise missile attack on Syria, the Obama administration is seemingly trying everything in its power to sabotage the UN chemical weapon investigation in Syria. So why are the US and Britain so keen to derail the UN inspectors? Well, it's because last time they investigated a chemical weapons attack in Syria, the UN concluded it was the rebels who were responsible. We can't have that happening again, can we? That's going to interrupt this whole narrative, this whole drumbeat for war. It's very inconvenient indeed, which is why after the UN inspectors were targeted in a sniper attack yesterday, which all the evidence shows leads back to the rebels, the US came out with this veiled threat that they couldn't, quote, guarantee the safety of UN workers, which was basically a threat. Now they've had to postpone the investigation until tomorrow. Who knows if it'll even continue? Every hour is crucial. If they found evidence that the rebels were behind this alleged chemical weapons attack, as they were in the past, it could scupper the whole narrative that's building up towards the attack. And basically, we're seeing the same thing that happened in Iraq. The inspectors went in, they found no evidence of weapons of mass destruction, and they were told by the US, doesn't matter. Get out because we're going to bomb the crap out of this place anyway. So we're seeing the same thing unfold in Syria yet again. On the one hand, they're saying this chemical weapons inspection is inconsequential. It doesn't matter. We've already made our minds up before that any evidence has come in. And then on the other hand, they're actually trying to sabotage it with these sniper attacks and now a veiled threat telling the UN to get out of the country. They can't guarantee their safety. So dirty tricks all along the way in the build-up to war, as you would expect. Meanwhile, in America, this is out of benswan.com, how America reacted, Miley Cyrus versus Syria. And you can see the graph we're displaying here now. This is a Google search comparison from 2 days ago for the search terms Miley Cyrus versus Syria. And as you can see, an infinitely greater number of Americans are more interested in some whore of Babylon, talentless airhead gyrating on stage than they are the fact that their government is about to lead them into another war that could very well end up being the genesis of World War III. So you've got a twerking Miley Cyrus versus a potential global nuclear conflict. No competition for Americans. Miley Cyrus wins hands down. Someone on Facebook came up with a separate graphic, which you can now see, in a desperate attempt to kind of hoodwink Americans into paying attention by combining the two subjects. Don't think it's going to be successful, but good effort anyway. So, you know, verge of another war. Americans are obsessed with MTV Video Music Awards and Miley Cyrus gyrating about on stage, par for the course with the zombies. Couple of quick items of financial news in relation to Syria now. Dow falls 100 amid mounting worries over Syria. All S&P sectors lower. This is CNBC.com. Stocks remained in negative territory Tuesday, with the Dow drifting further from its psychologically important 15,000 mark amid building worries over potential US military action in Syria. And gold is having a huge day, and it just went straight vertical, reports Business Insider. And again, when war is on the horizon, of course, investors rush to the safe haven of gold bullion. And if it gets as bad as some have warned later down the line, then gold is just going to go parabolic. So all of you who bought during the recent dip are going to be patting yourselves on the back for making the right decision. Stock market heading lower, gold heading higher in response to these war drums.
Now you can watch the InfoWars Nightly News streaming live as it happens for free.
Check it out at infowars.com/show.
And now a fascinating article out of the Telegraph, switching gears into environmental news. Headline: weather could be controlled using lasers. Scientists are attempting to control the weather by using lasers to create clouds, induce rain, and even trigger lightning. Experts from around the world are together at the World Meteorological Organization next month to discuss how powerful laser pulses can be used to generate changes in the atmosphere that influence the weather. Their experiments have shown that intense pulses of light can cause ice to form and water to condense, leading to the formation of clouds. And they've begun testing this, firing lasers into the sky. And you know that if they're going public with this now, then, you know, as we've documented, governments have already been geoengineering on a vast scale for decades, altering the weather, altering disasters before they happen. And I guess that, you know, firing lasers into the sky is less dangerous than loading the atmosphere in the name of reducing global warming, which is what the likes of Bill Gates-funded scientific organizations have been doing for many years, with potentially disastrous consequences as these geoengineering projects get bigger and bigger. But now they're talking about firing lasers into the sky to alter the weather. That's out of the Telegraph today. Time for our quote of the day now. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. That's Dwight D. Eisenhower, who of course warned us of the perils of the military-industrial complex, now set to suck hundreds of millions, if not billions more dollars out of the US economy in the name of another insane yet lucrative military intervention in Syria, which, as we said earlier, is going to cost some $750 million just for a kickoff. So again, warning from history from Dwight D. Eisenhower.